You've ever had someone in your life, a friend, maybe even a family member who just vanished? I mean, one day they're a part of your life, and the next, poof, they're gone. No text, no call, no explanation. Today, we're going to get into the psychology of what's really going on with people who cut everyone off.
Right? It's a question that can seriously mess with your head and leave you feeling confused, maybe even hurt. It feels so sudden, so personal. So, what is actually happening inside someone's mind when they decide to completely erase you, and often everybody else, from their life?
And let's be clear, we're not just talking about ghosting after a couple of dates. No, this is something much deeper. This is a complete and total severance of ties, sometimes with people they've known for years. It just leaves this gaping hole where a relationship used to be.
Okay, so let's start by looking at the act itself. We're calling it the Great Disappearance, because from the outside, it just looks like a sudden and honestly pretty harsh decision. Our first reaction is almost always to judge the person who left. We think, wow, that was cruel, or they were too selfish or cowardly to have a real conversation. And look, the impact is definitely painful, there's no denying that. But the question we're really digging into today is that the whole story? Or is there something much deeper going on here? So, to find out, we need to really unpack the why. Because, it's rarely as simple as someone just deciding they don't care anymore. A lot of the time, this action is rooted in some pretty complex psychological drivers. These right here are some of the main forces at play, and it helps to think of them not as excuses, but as these powerful, often invisible pressures. We're going to see how things like past trauma, or even how we learn to connect as kids, can lead someone to a point where they are so emotionally exhausted that just disappearing feels like the only way to survive. So, first up, let's talk about trauma. For some people, a conflict, or heck, even just the idea of getting too close emotionally, can trigger a painful memory from their past. Their brain's survival instinct, that fight, flight, or freeze response, just takes over. But instead of running from a lion, they're fleeing a relationship that feels, to them, overwhelmingly threatening. Cutting someone off becomes their emergency escape hatch. Our very first relationships as kids basically teach us the blueprint for how to connect with other people. So if those early bonds were unstable or unreliable, a person might learn a tough lesson, that intimacy is dangerous. For them, getting close to someone just feels incredibly risky. And cutting all ties can feel like the only way to prevent a hurt they believe is inevitable. Okay, imagine your emotional energy is like a bank account. Every single interaction, every argument, every emotional demand is a withdrawal. Now, for someone who is just completely burned out from their job, from family stress, from mental health struggles, that account can hit zero. At that point, they become emotionally bankrupt. Shutting down all connections feels like the only way to stop the bleeding, to stop losing what little they feel they have left. So this brings us to a really important way of reframing this whole thing. What if this isn't an attack on other people? What if it's actually an extreme form of self-defense? A way of building a fortress of solitude to keep any more pain from getting in. This quote, it's from someone who's done this, and wow, it is so telling. It just speaks to this profound level of desperation and pain. You see, it's not about being malicious, it's about pure survival. The isolation actually feels safer than the risk of connecting with someone. And that right there is the key. For the person building this wall, the goal isn't to punish the people on the other side. It is all about protecting what's on the inside. The silence, the distance, those are just the bricks and mortar for a fortress they truly believe they need to build just to survive. But, and this is a really important but, we have to distinguish this from healthy behavior. You see, setting healthy boundaries involves communication. It's like installing a door in that wall, one you can open and close. A total cutoff, on the other hand, is building a solid wall with no way in. It doesn't protect the relationship, it ends it, leaving absolutely zero possibility for repair or understanding. And building that fortress? Well, it absolutely has consequences. There is a steep price for all that silence, and it's a price that's paid by everyone involved. The impact is felt on both sides of that wall. For the person who disappears, yeah, there might be an initial rush of relief, a feeling of safety. But that safety often comes at the cost of deep isolation, and they never learn how to actually work through conflict. Meanwhile, for those of us left behind, there's no relief. There's just confusion, a lot of pain, and this really difficult process of grieving a relationship that never got any closure. So,
Where does that leave us? How do we move forward with this information? Well, the goal isn't to excuse the pain this causes, but maybe to look beyond the vanishing act itself and try to find a path towards some kind of understanding. The pain of being cut off is 100% real and valid. But if we can shift our perspective even just a little bit, from a place of pure judgment to one of curiosity, well, that can change everything. It's about recognizing the why behind the what. So, this path to understanding really starts by seeing the behavior not as the core problem itself, but as a symptom of a much deeper issue. It's a flawed and often really desperate defense mechanism against some kind of immense pain. And when we can start to see it that way, it opens up the possibility of approaching the whole situation, and maybe even the person, with empathy, even while we're still hurt. And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. In a world where relationships are messy and endings are hard, we always say we want closure. But what does that really mean? This kind of behavior really forces us to confront our ideas about connection, about communication, and what we truly owe each other when a relationship comes to an end.